A major shakeup inside Ukraine's government at a critical moment in the push for a peace deal. President Zelensky's top aide and lead negotiator, Andriy Yermak, has resigned. It happened just hours after his home was raided by anti-corruption police. The shakeup comes just one day after Thanksgiving, with Ukraine and the U.S. set to resume negotiations this weekend, and with Russia signaling its own next move. The New York Post reporting today that it received an impassioned text message from Yermak last night saying that he was headed to the war's front line. Quote, "I am going to the front and am prepared for any reprisals." The Kremlin says a U.S. delegation is expected in Moscow next week, and Vladimir Putin is already laying out new hardline demands, including threats to take additional Ukrainian territory by force if Kyiv doesn't withdraw troops. All of this makes Yermak's exit even more significant. He's been the public face of Kyiv's negotiating team, and just days ago, he said the last major gap with Washington was territory. In fact, before yesterday's raid, Yermak told The Atlantic that Ukraine never cede land to Russia as part of a deal, saying, quote, "Not a single sane person today would sign a document to give up territory." Joining me now is David Lawler, the national security editor at Axios. He's been tracking these negotiations from the start. David, Yermak was deeply unpopular in Ukraine, but he provided a foil. He provided some value to Zelensky in that he was a magnet for discontent and criticism. So I guess the question I want to ask you is whether Zelensky is enhanced or made weaker by this departure.
He looks weaker at the moment. He had been pressed to fire Yermak earlier. He had consistently stood by him, and then finally was forced into this move after Yermak's home was raided as part of this corruption probe. Yermak has been not only chief of staff and not only chief negotiator, but really minister for everything. He's been described as, Zelensky's right arm, the guy who was sort of the enforcer of loyalty to Zelensky internally, and the guy that, as you said, sort of absorbed some of the criticism, not only domestically, but also from abroad. There was a bit of a good cop, bad cop dynamic between the two of them. He's now gone. Zelensky is in the process of shaking up his presidential staff. He might emerge from this with cleaner hands and a sort of a free path to define what the future of Ukraine's government looks like. But at the moment, when your right-hand man is forced out after his home is raided by corruption authorities, it's not going to reflect very well on the guy at the top.
And his departure follows that of two other cabinet-level ministers. I guess this is a glass half empty or half full. You could say this is healthy. This is what a democracy does to cleanse itself of bad behavior at the highest reaches, or others will say Ukraine is up to its old tricks.
Yeah, so we actually interviewed Yermak, my Axios colleague Barak Ravid and I, 3 days before his resignation. We asked him about the corruption allegations, and that's how he framed it. Now, of course, he's self-interested a bit. I don't think he knew he was going to be resigning in a couple of days, but he said people who criticize Ukraine for corruption should consider the fact that, if we were really a deeply corrupt authoritarian country, these kind of independent corruption investigations wouldn't be allowed to happen, wouldn't be allowed to proceed to the very highest levels of government. So basically, don't politicize it. Let these processes run their course. Now, it should be said, Yermak was accused of trying to nip this in the bud earlier. So his hands are not entirely clean. But that was his framing on it, that Ukraine is a functioning democracy, and the fact that these corruption allegations should happen reflects well on Ukraine rather than badly.
You've done a lot of reporting as to how the peace negotiations got to where they are now, the development of the talking points and the agreement on the Trump side of the ledger. So where does that go given this news?
Yeah, so as of the last high-level conversations between the U.S. and Ukraine, the decision was reached to come to agreement on all of the other issues besides territory. And so get that all agreed between the U.S. and Ukraine, and then let the presidents talk about territory. You just read off the quote from Yermak saying nobody would agree to give away territory in exchange for peace. That is what they're being asked to do at the moment. The Russian position, as Vladimir Putin just reinforced, is that we're going to take this territory either by force or through negotiations. And the U.S. has backed them up in that, basically, that they think the war is moving in Russia's direction. And so Ukraine will have to make painful territorial concessions in order to get a deal.
And as finally, as you and I are having this conversation, the last 24 hours have been that have seen very aggressive
been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing.